The human mind does two things. Every psychologist and neuroscientist won't disagree with this. The human mind does two things. Creates it likes to create stories, and it maintains a suspension of disbelief. It hides the fact that it is the one creating the stories. This is how all of our reality is created. And we actually love this. We love it. This is why movies work, or plays, or storybooks. Because suspension of disbelief is important in story writing and in Hollywood, or we won't enjoy ourselves. If we can't believe that Transformers is a movie, Transformers is a plot about alien robots that turn into cars and fight each other. Without suspension of disbelief, we'd be watching that movie the whole time going, this is total nonsense. I can't get into this. This is complete nonsense. You would constantly be watching the movie going, this is not real. None of this is real. And you would also be aware of the screen that you're watching it on, and you would just say, this is just images flashing on a screen. It's not real. And without suspension of disbelief, without your ability to suspend what you know to be true, you can't enjoy yourself. You just can't do it. You'd be too busy. You wouldn't be able to watch it as a movie. You would just be seeing images flashing on a screen of nonsense. And the reason why we do things like put on 3D glasses, or in other countries we have 4D, right? Here in the United States, our movie theaters are kind of they're primitive, right? Our theaters haven't been updated in decades, right? So I don't think we have 4D. I haven't seen a 4D theater in the United States, but in Mexico, they're all over Mexico, and they're awesome. They're awesome. Mexican theaters are way nicer than American theaters. And the reason why that's fun, now what they do in 4D is not only are you wearing 3D glasses, but they'll spray water and smells at you, and the seats move around, and all sorts of stuff happens to better immerse you into the film so you can feel like the film is more real than it really is. Because without it, to us, that's fun. We enjoy it. We like that. The human mind loves it. So suspension of disbelief is power. Both of these are powers of the mind. And again, we love it. We wouldn't want to do without it. Sure, they're the cause of all suffering as well. But as we'll get to, you will see there actually is no suffering. It's all your enjoyment. You love it. One Swami says you suffer because you want to. This is the difference between an enlightened person and an unenlightened person. Actually, an enlightened person would argue there is no difference, but at this juncture, we'll talk about, from our perspective, the difference between one is what you would consider suffering, an enlightened person would consider fun, because it's not you that's suffering. Again, I'm getting a little out there now, but let me reel it back into what I'm talking about. The human mind has this power to create stories, and it's nothing metaphysical. We see this all the time when optical illusions work this way. Or, have you ever seen someone that you thought was somebody else? And you said, hey, so-and-so. And, I'm Indian. It happens to me constantly. People always mistake me for other Indians. And, I laugh it off as it being racist because, folks in the United States can't tell Indians apart, right? The amount of times I've gone to an event and somebody will be like, hey, Manish. And be like, my name's not Manish. But, they know another Indian person, and they just assume every Indian person they see is that Indian person. It happens to black folk too, right? It just happens, right? And it actually happens to white folk too, because I've seen Indians mix up white folks. So don't feel bad about it, right? It's a natural phenomenon of the human mind, right? So you mistake something for something else. Here's the classic example of the rope and the snake, which is a terrible example for an American, by the way. If any Swamis are watching this from India, they always bring over this example of you mistake a rope for a snake. But in reality, it was never a snake. It was always a rope to begin with. But your mind superimposed or created this story that it was a snake. And you're like, it's a snake. we of course don't have this problem in the United States. It's a kind of a hard example. So if that example goes over your head, don't worry about it. It goes over my head too. I only understood it after the fact. Simply because in America we really don't have experience with neither snakes nor ropes. The only time I've seen snakes are at the zoo, and they're safely behind a cage and they're fun. And the only time I've ever had experience with a rope was in junior high gym class when an angry gym teacher was forcing me to try to climb it. And let's face it, a rope in my mind is way more terrifying than a snake. So that example makes no sense. Makes no sense. But they're alluding to that notion, and that is proof. We experience it all the time. We mistake things for other things. Our minds tell stories. You've texted somebody and they didn't text you back right away, and you create all sorts of stories of what you think might be going on there, right? So it is a natural thing of the mind to create stories and then utilize our power of suspension of disbelief to forget that it's a story that's been created. What we're finding out here through Drig Drishya Viveka and pretty much any other non-dual texts from Eastern philosophy, what we're finding out here is what we consider to be reality in general. Our notion that we are this being that's living in a reality that's external to us and separate from us is that power itself of creating something from nothing on top of a suspension of disbelief, or coupled with that suspension of disbelief that makes us forget that we are the ones that have created something from nothing, and we take it to be real.